2003 YZ250. It's a bike that I've owned for many years. I got it back in 2006, 2007, right around that time frame. And I got it from a guy that had it from new, but had it in storage for almost 2 years. So it really hadn't seen much riding time when I got it. It's exactly as I bought it. I've done absolutely nothing to the bike. All I've done is ride it and maintain it. It's a great bike. I love riding it. It's a fun bike. It's got quite a bit of work done to it. The guy that I got it from had done all kinds of stuff to it. Some of it's pretty obvious and some of it not so much. The obvious stuff is the usual bolt-on components that guys do to two-stroke bikes. It's got a pro circuit exhaust and silencer, V-force reeds, Hinson clutch. It's got aftermarket wheels and hubs. It's got a bunch of carbon fibre on it, which is unusual for bikes of this time, especially when you consider that the carbon fibre is all carbon fibre components that were made by a company that is more synonymous with road bike exhausts than they are with dirt bike carbon fibre parts. I suspect it was because companies like Lightspeed and P3 Carbon probably weren't producing commercial dirt bike carbon fibre components like they do today. But whatever the reason, I really don't know why they did it, but they're on the bike and I see no reason to take them off. It's got a change that's not quite as obvious unless you stand it up against another 2003 YZ250. You get a little bit of a hint that something's not quite the same. Doing that, standing side by side with another 250, you see the exhaust is a little different and it's got a carbon fibre airbox. And the reason for those is it's bored and stroked to 360cc. There are quite a few companies around that are offering big bore kits for these 250 bikes. There's not too many, or none that I'm aware of, that offer stroking kits for the same bike. The guy that had it certainly spent a fair bit of time and effort and money on boring and stroking this bike, and it's turned it into a pretty fun bike. It's certainly got a broader power curve than bikes, the 250 two-strokes, certainly of this era. It's certainly got a stronger low end. It pulls better down low. It's still got a great top end. It's just got a broader range of power. And that makes it a really fun bike to ride and certainly lug through things. It works better than a conventional 250. And it's definitely, it throws you back. I mean, you know that you're riding something that's not stock. But anybody that's ridden a well-tuned, well-performing 250 two-stroke, it's no big deal. It's just a fun bike. And that being said, it's definitely no 500. Now, I'm of an age that I go back to riding and racing dirt bikes in the early to mid 80s. And certainly my favourite bikes to ride back then were the big bikes. I was all of probably 130 pounds wringing wet, and you throw your leg over even the early CRs, the CR 450s and 480s, which I rode a little bit. Mostly I rode YZ 490s, but you know they were all kind of similar, especially to a kid like I was. They just pulled for days. They were violent. The power just came on and hit you like a sledgehammer. They were a handful to ride, and anybody that's ridden those big two-strokes from that era will certainly know what I'm talking about. That being said, I'm certainly of the opinion that anybody that rode and liked those big two-strokes, those guys know that there is no substitute to riding those things. And so in recent times, I've been wanting to explore the options of getting another 500 two-stroke. Now, I have a few options or a few directions that I can go with this. One of those directions is to get an early model bike, a mid 80s, early 90s 500 two-stroke. And they're around, they're not that hard to find, but finding a decent one, finding one that's worthy of putting some time and effort and money into restoring and rebuilding a bike like that, finding that bike, that's like trying to find rocking horse shit. They just don't exist. The ones that are around, at least that I've seen, have been modified so heavily, not performance modifications, but modifications just to keep them alive. For the most part, they've had the shit kicked out of them, they've led pretty hard lives. So finding one that's a likely candidate to go through that whole restoration process is difficult to say the least. And if I was to go that route, at the end of the day, I end up with a mid 80s, early 90s model bike. Now, those 500 bikes are still a power unto themselves. The power that those bikes produce is nothing to be sneezed at. But we're still talking a bike that rides like a mid 80s bike, that handles like a mid 80s bike, that stops like a mid 80s bike. By today's standards, that's not much of a bike. So the other option that I have is to go the CR500 AF route. Now, Service Honda was doing those, and from all accounts, they're great bikes. I've heard nothing but good things about them. They have all the handling characteristics of a new-ish bike, with the fun and the exhilaration of the cantankerous CR500 engine. But there's a lot of guys doing that. I mean, I can't say they're plentiful, but they're not hard to find. I live in the upper Midwest of the United States, and you don't have to look too hard to find a bike that's already been done, or for that matter, for me to go out and actually build to fit a early model 500cc engine into a late model frame. Plenty of guys have done that, and I'd like to do something a little bit different. I'm fortunate in that I'm in the position of being able to do things a little different to most people, in that I have a full CNC machine shop in a workshop in my backyard that is full of, not just a lathe or a mill. I've got multiple CNC lathes, I've got multiple CNC mills and machining centers, I've got wire EDM, I've got CNC grinders. I've got a fairly well set up workshop in my backyard, for at least backyard purposes. And it's something that I do as part of my daily life. I design and build things just as my job. That's what I do for my living. I have all the software, all the CAD/CAM software that goes along with supporting all those machine tools. So I'm in a position to be able to do things a little different to most people. And that led me down the path of kicking around the idea of, what if I was to build my own 500cc engine? Now, I'm not talking building one from scratch. I'm talking, what if I was to take an existing platform and modify that? And the obvious candidate for that was a YZ250. Now, I'm not talking about taking a YZ250 motor like this and hogging the crap out of the crankcase, splicing on a big bore cylinder and calling that a YZ500. That's not what I'm advocating at all. That's not my plan at all. My plan is to take the YZ250 engine and use that as the basis for the crankcase and transmission to live together, and basically design a new crankcase that would then become part of a new case assembly, with the intention of, once designed, machining new cases from billet. It would incorporate the standard YZ250 mounting points, if at all possible, and it would utilize the same gearbox architecture, albeit with a change in gearbox. The gearbox is certainly going to have different ratios. It would still be a 5-speed. It would use the same shifting mechanisms and a similar shift drum. It would have to have a better clutch, but you know, a good quality aftermarket clutch is probably going to be up to the task anyway. But basically, design and engine, marrying those two pieces of technology together. So first step in determining whether or not that's even doable is for me to come up with some CAD models, some 3D models that allow me to start playing with the design. Now, I can't find any of those that exist as an off-the-shelf part that I can just go and download from someplace online. So I've got to create my own 3D models. And the way to do that is for me to take a 250 engine and model the components. So recently I purchased a YZ250 bottom end from eBay, and I should see that. It should arrive any day now. My plan is to just tear that thing apart and model all the componentry that make up the YZ250 bottom end. Model each individual part and then create an assembly, a virtual assembly of that as a standard 250 engine, and then blow that assembly apart and start redesigning a crankcase around that 250 transmission, and go through all the usual design processes that one would go through in designing anything, but using that 250 motor as the footprint, or as the foundation, if you like. The intent would be to design a cylinder and transfers that would work with the 500cc capacity, and then if it all looks like it is going to work, and actually run simulations, run both FEA analysis on it, as well as some two-stroke simulations via something like Engmod 2T, determine if it looks like it's going to be a viable engine, and if that's the case, then go through the motions of building cases and then ultimately building the engine and transmission. If that all works out and I can get a good running engine, and not just an engine that starts and makes a noise, but an engine that actually runs and makes power, that the intention is to make this a usable engine. If I can get to that point where I actually build and successfully build a running usable engine transmission combination, the intent would be to put it into a late model frame. And I'm going, or leaning towards, putting it into a late model 4-stroke frame. If I was to use the standard two-stroke mounting positions, it would be relatively easy to fit it into a 2-stroke frame. The problem is, there's really no such thing as a current model or a late model 2-stroke frame. They really haven't changed since the mid-2000s. And the whole purpose for doing this is to get a 500cc 2-stroke motor into a late model current handling, current braking frame combination. So I realized that fitting a 2-stroke motor into the 4-stroke frame is not going to be easy. They're not designed to take that. There's going to be issues with airboxes and exhaust actually fitting through that frame, but these are just tasks, and these are tasks that I'm up to. So first step is get this model, blow it apart, determine whether or not it's a viable proposition. If it is, find a bike, put the bike together, and ultimately ride it. I decided that I thought this is going to be an interesting project, to say the least, and that I really wanted to document this, to be able to look back on it. I'm sure it's going to be a fun time. I'm sure it's going to be a frustrating time as well, but usually looking back on frustrating times like this can be fun. Life experience has taught me that. I thought, what better way of documenting this than to shoot video along the way. So this is the first video that I'm taking to kind of kick off the process. Along those lines, I thought, what better way of storing that video than to upload it to YouTube. It allows me to basically create a chronicle of this journey, and other people may find it interesting. So there's the bonus of other people being able to see it. So that's what I'm doing. This is the first in what will be a series of videos. I will chronicle the process, starting with, once this engine arrives, I'll tear that apart, and then the measuring process. I'll use a CNC mill that I have as basically a CMM, as a coordinate measuring machine. And that, coupled with a touch probe in the machine tool, will allow me to capture all the dimensions that I need to create the model. I'll build the model. I'll document that process as much as I can as well, because 3D modeling is a pretty interesting process, and certainly the 3D design process, that's pretty interesting in its own right. So I'll capture as much of that as I can and try and create some interesting content and just keep posting it to YouTube, and hopefully some people find it interesting. So here we go. We'll see where this finishes up. Hopefully in 6 months, a year's time, I've got a bike that I'm ripping around on and having a good time with. But however it goes, it will be interesting. It will be fun, and maybe some people want to come along and check out the journey.